Story 1. Recently, a scientist was scrolling through some Hubble telescope images and saw a picture of this weird white streak going across space. One in a million chance that someone would notice this, and even less of a chance they wouldn't dismiss it as lens flare or something. As they dug deeper, they found it wasn't a mistake and, in fact, they had just discovered the first of its kind supermassive black hole, weighing as much as 20 million suns, speeding through space and leaving a 200,000 light-year-long trail of newborn stars, twice the diameter of our Milky Way galaxy. Story 2. There are a large number of archaeological sites that were only discovered once aerial photography became a thing. Story 3. The moving stones in Death Valley. It was considered paranormal until it was recorded, and the reason solved the mystery. Basically, rain and cold below freezing temperatures turn the shallow ponds into ice. The high winds shift the sheets of ice, pushing the rocks across the desert floor. Funny how something that seemed so mysterious ended up having a logical reason. Story 4. Sprites are vertical, firing, red-tinted, and cold lightning. They were theoretical until one was captured on camera in 1989. Story 5. The Golden Mole. They were thought to be extinct since no one had seen one in 80 years. Not that people did not think they were real, they just did not think they were still around. Story 6. The fact that when a horse gallops, all four legs are off the ground at one point. Horses move so fast, no one knew for sure until they could snap a picture during a horse race. Story 7. Giant sequoias. Early explorers would come across them in the very few groves where they exist high in isolated mountains and excitedly try to describe them to others once they were back in civilization. Nobody believed them. This was the height of all kinds of exploitative nonsense like snake oil and traveling sideshows with mummified mermaids. And it was not like you could just cut a chunk the size of a house off of this enormous tree and carry it down the mountain. Photography is what got people to believe. Story 8. This answer is a bit of a stretch, but when scientists were looking at the spectrum of the sun, sunlight split by a prism into the various lines caused by elements absorbing and re-emitting light, they saw all the lines of hydrogen with an extra line. They thought it was a new unknown element and called it helium after Helios, the Greek sun god. Helium was later isolated on Earth, and its spectrum matched the mystery element of the sun. Story 9. A handful of unknown or previously thought to be extinct animals were caught on game cameras deep in the wilderness. Odd and interesting animal behaviors and relationships, like the friendship between coyotes and badgers, or the keeping of pet frogs by giant burrowing tarantulas to keep their burrows and eggs free of tiny insects. Story 10. The big voids in the Great Pyramid were discovered in the last 10 years with a technique called muon imaging. Basically, they track how much cosmic rays get blocked when going through different parts of the pyramid. One of the smaller passageways found using this method was a hallway above the main entrance to the pyramid. They ended up sticking a small camera inside to image it. It hasn't been seen directly by people in over 4,500 years. Story 11. Rogue waves. For the longest time, talk of water walls was seen as sailors' tales, with even the scientific community deeming it impossible for such huge coherent waves to form without breaking apart. And most terrifying, we only have recordings from large steel ships that can withstand such waves. Any ship before those simply disappeared without a trace. Story 12. The entire inner part of Papua was considered uninhabitable for centuries, until airplanes flew over it in the 1930s and found there were hundreds of different tribes living in those mountain ranges. Story 13. Mountain lions in Illinois, supposedly extinct since the late 1800s, had reports of sightings in rural areas that were common but not believed until trail cameras became available. Ball lightning. I read about 10 years ago that it was finally caught on tape in an unrelated lab experiment. I read this in a credible source, but I can no longer find mention of this article on the internet. I experienced ball lightning myself and read a lot about it back then to figure out what I experienced. Story 14. Giant squid were only caught on camera for the first time in 2006. Then, to the horror of everyone, they found an even bigger one, the colossal squid, 1 year later in 2007. Story 15. The photos that go with the common gunfighter legends. Post photos, but still. They didn't have the capability to take in-action photos, but Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the Earps, Billy the Kid, Wild Bill Hickok. There is about one to a small handful of photos of each of them, and if they didn't have the photos, people wouldn't have believed they existed, even now. They are kind of the first round of famous legends who had real photos taken of them. Story 16. There is still debate over whether earthquake lights are a real thing, but there is some pretty convincing footage of them now that very much does not look like just power transformers exploding and so on. Here is one from an earthquake in Wellington, New Zealand. Story 17. I know this isn't quite what you're asking, but given the tensions at the time and the possibility of it being found by the French 6 years earlier, the wreck of the Titanic is a big one that people might have regarded as fake if it hadn't been photographed so extensively. Indeed, there was supposition for a long time that it had been buried in an underwater earthquake in 1929 and would never be found. In a similar vein, the conspiracy theorists around September 11th might have a much easier time of it if there wasn't so much footage of United Airlines Flight 175 striking the South Tower. The impact of American Airlines Flight 11 into the North Tower was only caught on camera 3 times, and only one shows the collision in any great detail, the Naudette footage. Consider that there is very little public footage of American Airlines Flight 77 impacting the Pentagon, so some people talk about that being a missile. There's apparently no footage of United Airlines Flight 93 beyond the plume of smoke created from its crash in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Story 18. Presiding officer tampering with ballot papers in local elections in India. Story 19. Hubble's redshift photos proved that the universe was expanding. Until then, it was believed that the universe was static. Einstein even changed one of his equations because he, too, at that time, thought that the universe was constant. Story 20. Not sure this fits perfectly, but it jumps to mind. Tank Man, Tiananmen Square protester. Story 21. Bo Jackson threw a baseball over 300 feet on a rope, which was previously thought to be impossible, to get Harold Reynolds out at home plate. He once ran up and down a wall effortlessly. Out of pure frustration, he would regularly break his baseball bat over his head or his knee. After being out of football for a couple of years and not practicing with the team, he joined the Raiders midseason and promptly set a rushing record for Monday Night Football. Story 22. How about Caught on an Old Wax Disc? The early days of what we know as blues music are dotted with a bunch of musicians for whom the only proof they existed is the few recordings they left behind. People from record companies looking to capitalize on Southern folk and blues music would go to random Southern towns and wander around looking for people with an interesting sound. Musicians would hear they were in town and seek them out. Makeshift recording studios were set up in hotel rooms, the back rooms of corner stores, etc. More regionally well-known players like Charlie Patton had actual sessions booked in advance in big cities, but this was less common. Many of them only did 1 or 2 sessions and recorded a handful of songs. Making their identification more difficult was that they were often given pen names by the record companies or the musicians chose to record under nicknames, which led to their real names being lost. Some were also illiterate and an uncanny amount were blind. Birth records, especially for Black people in the South, were not well kept. No photos exist of the vast majority. Even Robert Johnson, probably the most legendary from this era, has only 2 to 3 confirmed photos known to exist. I would say the most infamous of these is Gishi Wiley. Many attempts have been made to positively identify her, but all have failed to be conclusive. There is a theory that she was on the run under an assumed name for killing her husband. Bo Weevil Jackson, almost certainly a name invented by a record company employee, is another. Absolutely nobody knows anything about him other than he recorded a few songs and pretty much vanished. Blind Roosevelt Graves is one from the same time and place who recorded a lot of more religious music. More is known about him, but there was confusion about his brother and recording partner, Roy Graves. People figured there was no way someone was named Roy, and that it was sloppy penmanship, possibly for Leroy, until a very clear set of notes came to light in the 2000s that showed his name was Roy Graves. I have zero clue how to pronounce it. Story 23. The discovery that not all life is derived from photosynthesis. Until they deployed a submersible to deep-sea hydrothermal vents, organisms that obtain their food and energy from chemical reactions were discovered. Story 24. That one baseball player who threw the ball and it hit a bird that just so happened to fly in the pitch path. The bird went into a poof of feathers. I personally wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen the video. Story 25. Most of what we know about astronomy and cosmology is captured in the cameras of telescopes. Just the Hubble telescope alone completely reshaped our understanding of the structure and composition of the universe. A lot of what we know about black holes, including the first experimental evidence of their existence, came from Hubble. Its influence on science is hard to overstate, with over 12,000 publications. If they average 100 citations each, there's potentially millions of publications referencing those. Every modern astronomy textbook references the Hubble's discoveries. Story 26. Funny how everyone's here with some of the most interesting, actually knowledgeable facts. And the first thing I could think of was the video of a man playing badminton with cats and the one where a cat gets boinked unbelievably. Story 27. Black holes. Scientists theorized black holes existed, but we didn't know for sure until we snapped a picture of one in 2019. Einstein himself wasn't really sure that black holes existed, he said. The fact is, we're drawn to things that we don't understand because we yearn to know more. They're terrifying, but we can't look away. And the reason they're terrifying, the reason this is an important image, is because when you look into the middle of it, you realize that we've theorized about these monsters being out there, and now we know they are, and what's more, now we see them, he continued. This is the only place in the universe where the cosmos ties a knot you can't untie. Every other place in the universe you can, in theory, come back from, but not there. Astronomers have detected many black holes since the 1970s, but in each case only indirectly, added Charles Alcock, the Donald H. Menzel Professor of Astrophysics and Director of the Center for Astrophysics. This is the first time we have an image of a black hole itself. This is a remarkable confirmation of more than a century of theoretical work. End Event Horizon Telescope Director Shepard Dolman. Story 28. Goblin Shark. For more than 100 years, this strange deep-sea shark was only known from preserved specimens. In 2003, a live goblin shark was filmed for the first time. Story 29. Rogue waves were only theorized about until approximately 2 decades ago, when the Dropner wave was caught by chance on camera. Up to that point, they were considered a sailor's fairy tale. Story 30. Space Bat. Never forget. Story 31. This does not completely fit, but gravitational waves were predicted, though we did not have the technology to detect them. This changed with the construction of the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, which detected and therefore proved the first gravitational waves in 2016 from a black hole. Story 32. That a galloping horse has all its feet off the ground at periods of its gallop. This also accidentally invented cinema. Story 33. Pluto. Some astronomers just noticed a small dot that had moved between 2 pictures. It was literally only 2 pixels on a screen. That's how Pluto was discovered. Story 34. I'm going to say dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of police brutality, misconduct, assault, and murder cases. Since cameras became common, police officers can no longer easily dismiss their actions by asking, "Who are you going to believe, me or a criminal?" Story 35. Not camera per se, but rogue waves were pretty much only confirmed to be real after a sensor recording from a measured buoy that is part of a Norwegian oil rig. This is despite old sailors' tales of massive, unexpected waves appearing from nowhere, going back all the way through recorded history and across cultures. Story 36. During World War II, as Allied forces liberated Nazi concentration camps, they encountered horrific evidence of the Holocaust. Understanding the critical importance of documenting these atrocities and anticipating that people would not believe the level of horror that occurred, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, among other leaders, ordered soldiers to film and photograph the conditions in the camps. Considering Israel's actions against Palestinians are now being live-streamed and people refuse to believe it, I think Churchill had astute foresight.